Pretty tough assignment to write someone's biography and legacy while that person is still alive, but that's exactly what's in this book, Master of Persuasion, about Brian Mulroney. Well, many years earlier, I tried to capture his legacy on iChannel. Here's a quick look at Brian Mulroney, Canada's former Prime Minister.
You know, as a journalist, and you're talking from a journalist point of view at this time, and there was the whispering in the background about Mulroney when Joe Clark stepped down, when Joe Clark did that, one of his first stubborn moves and said, I need that. Was there this feeling that Mulroney might be the heir apparent?
Well, I think so, but I always think my decision-making and thoughts at the time, when I look back 20 years, was excellent and prescient and correct. But I don't think I'm exaggerating to say, I think a lot of people said on the outside, this is now the guy from Quebec's turn. And then when the campaigning began, and this kind of campaigning is in church basements, people's kitchen tables, it's very small coffee parties, one at a time. Mulroney was very good at that, and he was a media darling. People forget, we're going to get into his media image eventually, I'm sure, but it was a love-in with the media. 20, 25 minutes of network television given over to him, and I said, this is it. Nobody else is getting any kind of attention like that.
You know, he gets into office, you were talking about this love affair with the media. One of the things he's going to be remembered for is wading into some really dangerous waters. Were you surprised with Distinct Society in Meech Lake?
I was surprised with everything. The government at the time was jokingly called a government that was all action, no talk. I actually spoke with one of your colleagues, a cabinet minister at the time, who said, you know, when you make a Hollywood movie, you spend, you know, $50 million making the movie, but you might spend 30, 40, 50 million, again, promoting it. We're doing all these good and interesting things, and nobody is promoting it, and nobody's telling the Canadian people that we're doing it. They were controversial, difficult, intractable matters of public policy, and you can't do that without excellent communication, and those two governments didn't have it. So I was indeed surprised at some of the things that were tackled, and disappointed at how poorly they were communicated to the electorate.
Distinct Society, isn't it true? It still is a sore spot in many Canadians.
Well, sure, and it's a huge topic because it was not written anywhere that we needed to have the Canadian Constitution in Canada, or that it even needs to be written, because Britain gets along just fine with a hodgepodge of documents that comprise the historical Constitution. America has an intractable Constitution. The ERA, I think, has been on the books as an amendment for 100 years. So what Mulroney was trying to do is bring the 7 million, roughly, people who were not officially signatories to that Constitution under the constitutional tent that maybe shouldn't have even existed. So it's such a complex issue. But this raises another matter about Mulroney's legacy, which, in my view, is the inability to keep the deal alive and on the table. Any deal you do, whether it's a union negotiation or whatever, a marriage, whatever it might be, is not done the minute you sign on. The negotiations continue. There are what are called non-table participants, the media, the interest groups, the NGOs, etc. I was sitting in a premier's office when that first Meech Lake deal was done, and they were petrified that they would have their legislature swamped with protesters. I said, well, all you do is call up the feds, get them to fund groups that are in support of this. Never happened. And Mr. Stevens probably knows better if he'll tell us. I don't think that deal was adequately sold to the Canadian people, to the legislatures, to the politicians, to the people, to the interest groups.
We're talking about the highlights of a career and 3 little letters. GST, it's mentioned every time our current Prime Minister lowers it. It is one of the things that a lot of people and a lot of polls say that many Canadians really held against Mr. Mulroney.
This great contradiction that is Brian Mulroney, and frankly the contradiction that is politics. It's a very difficult business, as others know better than I. But the GST is probably one of the greatest pieces of public policy in Canada post-World War II, one of the top 5, yet it is one of the worst implemented pieces of politics in probably Canadian history. We had a manufacturer's sales tax of about 18%. We had 5 million jobs depending on trade and the manufacture of goods and services. We were one of the few countries that taxed its manufacturers. A value-added tax is, I believe, required for European Union. It's in Japan. I mean, it's like the normal thing to do. Even Ronald Reagan wanted it. And it should not have been visible. To Brian Mulroney's credit, I believe he wanted it to be visible so that future governments couldn't raise a hidden tax. But what happened is tourists don't like it. It is a reminder every time anyone buys a stick of gum that there is this new tax. Nobody thinks, oh, it's replacing a higher tax, and it was preposterously implemented, but a great piece of public policy.
And there was always, I remember interviewing Mr. Wilson at the time, and there was, they were trying to sell it that way, saying prices are going to go down when that 13.5% is eliminated, but Canadians really didn't feel that way.
The Francophonie, I believe he reinvigorated the Francophonie and was able to because probably one of 3 prime ministers who have been fully bilingual and bicultural, perhaps only one of 2. And I think that's another one of his legacies, is the reinvigoration of the Francophonie, the ability to keep some of those telephone lines open around the world so that future Canadian prime ministers might be able to use them. And then domestically and politically, the fact that I don't think we can have another Canadian prime minister who doesn't have at least Stephen Harper's ability in French, which is better than Joe Clark's. So I think that the bilingual and bicultural prime minister is another one of his legacies. Any views expressed here are not necessarily those of the Mackenzie Institute, its speakers, sponsors, or supporters, but the Institute is dedicated to fostering public discussion, debate, and education about security matters. Google the Mackenzie Institute to join the discussion. The Mackenzie Institute is grateful to its sponsors and supporters. Some of our short pods and long talks are a result of the support of Heathbridge Capital Management Limited, the National Post, and Dundurn Publishing. Any views expressed here are not necessarily those of the Mackenzie Institute, its speakers, sponsors, or supporters, but the Institute is dedicated to fostering public discussion, debate, and education about security matters. Google the Mackenzie Institute to join the discussion. The Mackenzie Institute is grateful to its sponsors and supporters. Some of our short pods and long talks are a result of the support of Heathbridge Capital Management Limited, the National Post, and Dundurn Publishing.